and welcome to SciLux, the podcast where we talk about scientific developments and technological changes in Luxembourg, but right now not exactly in Luxembourg, although a little bit in Luxembourg because we are in Luxembourg, but we don't have a Luxembourg-based scientist. But you are, Patrick, here pretty often.
Yes, I've been here since about 10 years, every year.
Exactly, yes. So if you see Patrick Michel walking down the street, yes, it's him. He can be spotted, especially in the space thing. But first of all, let me introduce my listeners to the guest. And the guest is Dr. Patrick Michel, who is a planetary scientist, physicist as well, right?
Astrophysicist.
Exactly, astrophysicist. Senior researcher at CNRS. I'm sure everybody knows, but still, just for the sake of abbreviations, French National Center for Scientific Research, where he leads the Lagrange Laboratory Planetary Science Team at the Côte d'Azur Observatory in Nice, France. Any more affiliations I need to mention?
I am also a global fellow of the University of Tokyo, which means a professor with a non-resident status at the University of Tokyo.
And it's brilliant you're mentioning that because I did want to touch upon that. Is there a difference of doing science in Europe and in Japan? Do you have to change your mindset when you go there?
Absolutely. And this is what's exciting for me is this cultural exchange. Working, with different countries and different cultures is really a great source of excitement because you have to adapt to the way they are thinking, the way they are working. And, we all benefit in working with different approaches. And I like that, actually, yes.
And it's also very important, we're talking a lot about interdisciplinarity in science, right? So it's that kind of additional step of being open to other ideas because you also put that layer of culture in as well.
Absolutely. And in fact, the field in which I'm doing my research is very multidisciplinary. So you have to have a different kind of expertise and also different kinds of ways of thinking. And effectively, from one country to the other, we don't necessarily think the same way or approach a problem the same way. And by adding together all these different ways, we make much more than just working one way.
So we're meeting before the Asteroid Day, but this will go live after the Asteroid Day. So let's start with that already. What is Asteroid Day and why is it important for you?
Yeah, so Asteroid Day is actually a day which is the 13th of June every year that remind us about an explosion that occurred over the Tunguska forest in Siberia, the 13th of June 1908, when a bolide exploded at 8 kilometers in the atmosphere and pulverized 2,000 kilometers squares of forest. And the reason why we want to make events around basically asteroids during that day is just to inform the public about the fascinating things that asteroids tell us about the solar system, the formation of the Earth, the origin of life, and also telling them about what we do in order to prevent an impact to occur because, and this is a positive aspect of it, we have means to predict and prevent an impact, which is really great because there are many natural hazards on Earth, tsunamis, earthquakes, etc. And for many of them, we cannot do anything. We try to predict them. Preventing them is almost impossible. Asteroid risk is one risk that we can predict and prevent, and we are making all the necessary steps to be able, in some terms, to offer to the next generations a robust plan that will allow us to not have the same fate as the dinosaurs. So during this day, every year, we organize public events so that we can explain to the public where we are in our ability to prevent an impact. What do we know about asteroids? And because we have so many great space adventures, because we have many space missions going to see asteroids, I mean, it's very important to share with them this excitement because our adventures are better than the ones of Indiana Jones.
Very interesting comparison. Thank you for that. But, I don't want to mention your age, but I know that you've been in planetary science for quite a few years. And you said we're talking about the risks and we're talking about the mitigation, and we want the general public to know that we are able to do it. So what do you see yourself throughout the years of what has changed scientifically from when you started until now? What are we able to do and what weren't we able to do when you started?
Oh yeah, so I'm very young in my head, by the way, less than 7 years old, of course, older physically. And effectively, when I started, what we knew about asteroids were just information coming from the light they reflect from their surface. You know, they are very small. They are not stars, so they don't generate their own light. They just reflect the light coming from the sun on the surface. And at the epoch, in the mid-1990s, we only knew little from what we could extract from the information from the light they send us. And then space missions started to fly by some of them and then even make rendezvous. And we went from the stage where these rocks were just faint light in space to the revelation that they are super complex small geological world, presenting us a wide diversity of shapes, sizes, structures, etc. And even on one asteroid, presenting a wide variety of geological features. On these rocks, which sometimes have just the size of the football stadium, you can see avalanches, boulders, craters, ponds, many things that tell us that, wow, in the solar system, many things are occurring. And this is really something that changed everything. Because now we realize that asteroids contain the record of the solar system history and can even allow us to better understand how the planet formed, and maybe they had a role in the emergence of life on Earth, because we then realized that some of them contain organic material, water, and after, thanks to numerical simulations, including some made at the Côte d'Azur Observatory where I work in Nice, we found that at the end of the formation of the Earth, there were a lot of impact, and it may be that this impact brought to the Earth all the materials that allowed life to emerge. So really, we went from very little knowledge and, just a few people interested to, understand what they are, to the realization that they contain much more information than we thought.
And going also to sample return missions, right?
Absolutely. So since then, we not only made a rendezvous, so just sending a spacecraft, staying there, sending us images and other information, but then going there and coming back with samples, which is extraordinary, and then even deflecting them. So for the first time also, since we started, we deflected the celestial bodies from its original trajectory. So I'm now really starting to be able to basically interact with them successfully.
So, of course, you're alluding to the DART mission, aren't you? So tell me a little bit about why this celestial body and not another one. How did that start?
Yeah, so in fact, what we wanted is, in order to, mitigate the risk, we need three things. Predicting, being able to predict that an asteroid coming to Earth. Otherwise, if we cannot predict, we cannot do anything. And then preventing. Once we know an asteroid come to us, okay, so far, what do we do? So we need to be able to deflect it, to avoid that it reaches the Earth. And in parallel of that, we are also trying to organize international coordination so that if something happens, we don't lose time to try to understand who does that, when, etc. So all these actions are done in parallel. And in the preventing aspect, then we wanted to do a first asteroid deflection test. So there are various techniques we can think about to deflect an asteroid. And we decided to try the technique called kinetic impact, which is basically to send a spacecraft at high speed to collide with an asteroid. So we just push into it by high speed, and hopefully we move it from its trajectory. Because it's a test. We didn't try to deflect an object that was threatening. It's just a test. So we actually chose an object which is not threatening us. And in order to make sure that by deflecting it, we don't put it in the wrong trajectory, because then we would create the risk we try to prevent. That would be stupid. So we decided to not deflect an asteroid on its trajectory around the sun, but to deflect a small moon of an asteroid on its trajectory around its main body. Because in fact, in the asteroid population, we have 15% of them which are like the Earth and the Moon at small scale, with a main body, a main rock, around which a natural rock also evolved. We call them binary asteroids. And the one we chose is called Dimorphos. The main body is about 800 meters in size, and the small moon called Dimorphos is 150 meters in size. So what we wanted to do is to shoot on the small moon to reduce the time it takes for the moon to make one turn around the main body. So initially, this moon was turning around within 11 hours and 55 minutes. And so the aim was to reduce this time called the orbital period by a factor that we don't know, depending on its structure, etc. And why we chose this approach is because by moving the moon around the main body, we don't move the trajectory of the whole system around the sun, or too small to make a risk. So we can do whatever we want. We don't add any risk. So that was a good reason. And the second reason is because if we do this impact when this binary asteroid come close enough to the Earth, we can measure the change in the orbital period with ground-based telescope. And that way, if we just launch a projectile to shoot on the asteroid, even if we don't have an orbiting spacecraft to observe and tell us what happened, at least we can measure something from the ground. So that's why we chose this binary asteroid to make the first asteroid deflection test. And that was successful because DART was launched in 2021 and made the impact on the 26th of September 2022. I was in the center where there was the operation at the Applied Physics Laboratory of the Johns Hopkins University in the US at the time of the impact. And at that time, I was not 7 years old. I think I was 5 because I was jumping and screaming. There is even a video shown in some social networks and in some documentaries, actually, showing me screaming like hell because this was historical. This was the first time that we would deflect a celestial body, and this was the outcome of years of efforts. And the good thing is that the spacecraft had a camera to navigate and autonomously recognize the asteroid and shoot on it. That was a challenge. And we offer to the public to discover with us in live the real event and to participate. So that was really absolutely exciting.
This is exactly what I was thinking of. We'll talk about Hera mission in a second, but of course, recently in March this year, so 2025, you shared also some photos with the flyby, and I was thinking it just changes so much when all these missions can share photos with us, when we can see. And as you're saying, if it's live, then it's just
everybody
spectacular.
Is absolutely. And I have basically participated to all asteroid missions so far. And each time we got a new image of an asteroid, it was not corresponding to our prediction. So we have always been surprised so far, and there is no exception, showing us how far we are yet to really understand those bodies, because they are fascinating, because they are very counterintuitive. They are small. Therefore, the gravity at the surface is also very small, which means that the behavior is not necessarily the one that we experience on Earth. And in fact, I'm talking with you, I am excited, I jump on my chair, I come back on my chair because Earth is big. On an asteroid, we would have this podcast. Jumping like I do, I would already be in orbit. So everything is extremely sensitive, everything is very different from what we see on Earth, and therefore our brain is not yet used to it. And that's why each time we've been surprised. And after a few missions, I was thinking, we need to share that with the public. They need to have the same feeling as we have, because we are very lucky. We are like explorers. We discover new worlds, like Christophe Colomb going to another continent. But this continent is not even on Earth. Now we are going to see little rocks, which are hundreds of millions of kilometers from the Earth and are as small as a football stadium. This is crazy. And given this feeling, I want that the public can participate with us, because one of our tasks is also to inspire the public and the young generation. There are many problems on Earth, and I think that we can solve them more easily if we can still dream and have hopes and be inspired. And space adventures are there for that too.
We did mention in the beginning that you're an astrophysicist. So, of course, this means probably a lot of equations and a lot of calculations, right?
Absolutely, but this is a language and this is technical. The public doesn't need to know about our equations. But in fact, I love it.
I want to, so that's why I'm asking about it.
I love it. I think that the beauty of it is that with a language that we call mathematics, we can describe the behavior of the universe. And for me, that has always been fascinating, is that just by taking a pen and by being able to put in equations the way the material behaves, you can predict what happens. You look at the light of a star, and by analyzing this light with equations, you can give an age to the star, its temperature, its mass, without even touching it. Just by receiving the light and understanding how it works and putting that in this superb language that we call mathematics. I think this is super powerful. And this is how we calculate the trajectory of our spacecraft. We can tell after launch that in 10 months, at 1 second error bar, a spacecraft will shoot on an asteroid. This is fantastic.
It is, but I'm asking about it because, of course, there are uncertainties, there are assumptions as well. So that must be very stressful. It's your calculations and your teams, right?
Yeah, it's stressful, but it's also exciting. This uncertainty, because we are doing predictions. Sometimes they are wrong. As I said, all our predictions about what an asteroid would look like was wrong. But, this is actually funny, because when you are in an operation room and you receive the first images of a new asteroid, you have two behaviors. You have the scientists and the engineers. So the scientists, they are always happy. If they are wrong, they have a new challenge. If they are right, their predictions were right. And then you have the engineers. And I can tell you that when you receive new images and we are there, wow, that's not what we are predicting, and we are jumping like children, then the engineers look at us and say, yeah, well, your predictions were wrong, and now how do we do? And I have really high recognition for these people, because they have to adapt to a new situation, because effectively when a prediction is wrong, then all the design of the operation that they defined have to be revised. And this happened many times. I can cite the OSIRIS-REx mission by NASA and the Hayabusa 2 mission by JAXA, Japanese Space Agency. Both missions were going to take a sample of asteroids, and we told the operation team on each case, don't worry, on these asteroids there will be large regions without boulders, so very safe to land and take a sample. So they designed their operations such that they would land with an accuracy of about 50 meters. So 50 meters looks large, but we are 300 million kilometers away. So landing with a 50-meter accuracy on an asteroid of a few hundred meters is very challenging. And when we arrived, there were rocks everywhere. No large regions with no boulders. So, of course, we are super excited, because thinking, wow, why? How is it possible? So we like that. But the engineers are looking at us and say, well, now we have to, try to find new ways to navigate. And effectively, in each case, they had to revise entirely their strategies of operations in order to increase the accuracy and land in regions as small as 10 meters, even 6 meters in the case of Hayabusa 2. So that shows that, okay, for us, it's not a problem to have wrong predictions, but for the engineers, they have to be super flexible. But I must say that each time they were able to find solutions. And that's also give hope, because the space adventures shows that we can tackle huge challenges and solve big problems which seem impossible initially, simply because big people are motivated, are able to work together in a team with a multidisciplinary approach, and positively, like, okay, we need to tackle the challenge. And when you have this spirit, you find solutions. So the key is not to have a negative approach. It's on the contrary to say, okay, now we have to face this situation. What do we do about it? And then we find solutions.
Under extreme stress, I assume, but still looking at the cost side of things as well and everything else. Before we delve more into the science part of it, because I have a few questions about publications, for example, we mentioned astrophysics. I think it's a good moment for you to ask the pub quiz question, and listener, remember the answer only at the end of the podcast.
Okay, so my question is, what does a legendary rock star do in this astrophysics business?
Okay. And once again, remember, answer only at the end of the podcast. One of the things that was very interesting for me when I was preparing for our interview is that normally I go to publications, right? And I read all the articles and about different, papers on scientific conferences or whatever. Whereas in your case, of course, there's so much different type of science. I don't have a feeling that you are on the publish or perish side of things. How is it to do science in astrophysics? Do you also have to publish like crazy, so how do you, you're PI of missions and then you also have to publish? When
Absolutely.
Do you find time?
Oh, but, time is relative.
So you're a physicist, right?
Yeah. No, in fact, this is a key. The activity of a researcher is to develop new knowledge. And this new knowledge needs validations. So the validation goes to what we call the peer review process, meaning I have to submit my results to a journal, and there are reviewers, and then validation, and then publication. So this is the only way that science is validated, is through publication. So effectively, the reason why I do space missions is not only because I want to do the Indiana Jones going to a new space adventure. Of course, this is one part of the excitement, as well as managing a great team, because you cannot do everything by yourself. You need it's always a teamwork. Every effort counts. But it's also to eventually generate new knowledge and therefore publish this new knowledge. So this is really key. And in fact, for instance, this DART and Hera mission will allow us to validate our numerical simulations of impact physics at the scale of an asteroid. And it turns out that I was with a team of colleagues, the first to fully simulate the disruption of an asteroid in the early 2000s and show that when an asteroid is disrupted in its natural evolution between Mars and Jupiter, where most of the asteroids reside, then the fragments that are generated during the disruption tend to come back together, reaccumulate, and form what we call rubble piles, aggregates. And therefore, since most asteroids go into the disruption reaccumulation mode, we predicted that most of the asteroids smaller than 10 kilometers now should not be monolithic rocks. They should be rubble piles made of rocks held together by their own gravity. And therefore, they should contain a lot of void, because when you reaccumulate boulders with different geometries, they don't come back perfectly together. Therefore, you should have voids. And the prediction was then that in principle, the density of an asteroid should be smaller than the density of a solid rock. And effectively, space mission confirmed our prediction. So at least there was one prediction that was correct, that effectively all the bodies that we went to visit so far, except the biggest ones, have a density which is lower than their rock analogs, and therefore have this rubble pile structure, which was predicted by our numerical simulations.
So when you're talking numerical simulations, do you mean the Horizon 2022 project NEOMAP? That's where you were doing the simulations?
So these projects effectively were supported by the European Commission for 3 years. So I coordinated 15 laboratories in order to push the limit of these simulations. And the reason this is fascinating is, so I talked about asteroid disruption, that were early simulations that we did in the early 2000s. But then there is something very critical, is to understand the relation between the size of the projectile and the size of the crater that the projectile does. Okay. And typically we take a rule of thumb, which is that goes well for a planet. A crater is about 10 to 20 times the size of a projectile. So if an asteroid impacts the Earth and its size is about 50 meters, it will leave a crater of about 500 meters to 1 kilometer. And that's correct, right? Now, on an asteroid, things are different, because on an asteroid, you have a very low gravity. And therefore, when you impact an asteroid, the crater to be produced takes more time than on Earth. On Earth, if you do a crater, it takes seconds. On an asteroid, it can take several tens of minutes to hours. And that makes numerical simulations complicated, because to simulate an impact, what do? We calculate the propagation of a shock wave in a rock, because an impact occurs at several kilometers per second, so well beyond the sound speed of the material you go through, and therefore you have a shock that is generated, and you have to calculate how this shock propagates in the asteroid. But the problem is that because the process is so slow in low gravity, even when the shock is over, the crater continues to progress and to evolve. So the model is not appropriate because a model to compute shocks is not the same as a model to compute the slow evolution of a crater. So this European Commission funded program was very useful to support us to develop these new models that can both deal with shocks and the slow evolution of a crater. And the reason why we knew it's important is because the Hayabusa 2 mission by the Japanese was a superb mission, a sample return mission that was not just a sample return mission because it was launched in 2014, arrived at an asteroid called the Ryugu of about 1 kilometer in size in June 2018. And before even taking a sample, they landed a lander developed by CNES and DLR, the German Space Agency, French Space Agency, and made an impact experiment. So the spacecraft approached the asteroid, and when it was at 100 meters from the asteroid, it deployed a little box. Then the spacecraft went at large distance so that the box exploded and launched a projectile of 2 kilograms at 2 kilometers per second on the surface of the asteroid. This is totally crazy, by the way. I mean, only the Japanese can do that. I can tell you in Europe that would have been impossible, telling that we're going to explode a box in space and, make sure the spacecraft go away before it happened. It's totally crazy. So the box exploded, boom, made a crater. And we predicted that the crater would be about 2-3 meters in size given the impact energy of a box of projectile of 2 kilograms at 2 kilometers per second.
Were you correct?
Absolutely not.
That's what I was supposing that would be
Of course not. Of course not.
Because so you were jumping when that happened.
Oh yeah, I was like, what? Because when the spacecraft came back, so it stayed 2 weeks far away because there were some ejecta. We were scared that some ejecta from the crater could stay around, etc. So after 2 weeks, it came back and our prediction was 2-3 meters and the crater was 17 meters.
Oh, that's very much off.
That's very much off. Almost 1 order of magnitude, yeah. And the only way to explain this large size is if we removed any strength of the surface from the equations, when we talk about equations. We had to assume that the surface was cohesionless. Like a sand, when you take sand grains in your hand, then you let them go away and all the sand grains detach from each other. There is no glue. Okay, we call that a cohesionless sand when the grains are not glued together, right? So the surface of Ryugu was like that, like a cohesionless sand, which is totally counterintuitive because when you look at the site where the impact occurred, you have boulders. And for me, a boulder is solid, right? If you show me a boulder and you throw it to me, I'm expecting I'm going to be hurt. Here, globally, it behaved like a cohesionless land, even more complicated because some of the boulders were moved. So there were some strengths, but globally, it behaved like a strengthless surface. And to be able to model that is very complicated. So that's why we had to revise, and we had a good reason, because we had an observation, and we had the challenge to be able to reproduce this observation at the correct scale of an asteroid. And that also shows one lesson, very important one, is that you cannot rely on images to predict the mechanical response of a surface in such a low gravity environment. Because we stayed a few months before doing the impact around this asteroid, and based on the images which are superb, none of us was predicting that it would behave like a cohesionless material. And the same happened with OSIRIS-REx. The OSIRIS-REx mission was very different from Hayabusa 2. About the same time, we were on the 2 asteroids, and OSIRIS-REx was really sometime in orbit around the small asteroid Bennu, 500 meters in size, even made some flyby at very low distance because the aim was to choose the best sample. Very different approach. Hayabusa 2, the aim was to get a sample, but there were many other operations. At NASA, all was focused on getting the best sample. So they stayed 2 years, almost 2 years, around Bennu, doing flybys at very close approach. So we had superb images of the surface. absolutely super with cameras which are fantastic. And therefore, the science team, we were looking at, all the regions full of boulders, etc., with very different morphology, something we didn't understand because we have boulders which look like very rough, like if you see a cauliflower, you see the surface of a cauliflower. So some rocks are like a cauliflower, but on the other hand, very dark, not the white of a cauliflower, very, very dark. And some of the boulders are brighter, very angular. So how they come together, we don't understand that yet. But okay, many boulders. And then the sampling operation occurred. That was 20th October 2020. And when the sampling tool called the touch and go sample mechanism TACSAM touched the surface, it didn't feel any reaction of the surface, like if it was entering in a fluid. And again, whoa, surprise. In fact, it went at 50 centimeter depth. And because the thrusters were reactivated, the spacecraft went away. Otherwise, I don't know whether we would have gone through the whole asteroid. Probably not, because I think there is some stiffness at some point. But the surface itself was behaving like a cohesionless surface, although we were seeing gravel and rocks everywhere. So we are still at the stage where we know that images can be misleading. And hopefully, by interacting more and more with them, and we are in the golden age of asteroid exploration, we have many missions, I think, and my hope is that at some point we can relate images to a response. And this will be important for two reasons. First, to make sure that we design correctly the mission that want to interact with them. And that's also important for planetary defense, because we want to be able to deflect asteroids. And if we have only images to adjust the energy we give to deflect, then we have to make sure that the images give us the right information.
Of course, but that also means we can jump straight into the Hera mission, because that's the thing. You're going there to see what you've done, right?
Absolutely. In fact, Hera is like the Inspector Colombo. You know the Detective Colombo?
Yes, of course.
You know the criminal initially, and then you make the investigation. The same. We know who did the job, Dart, and now Colombo is going on the crime scene to investigate what happened.
So what do you think you will see there?
That's it. Well, now I don't take any risk anymore. Everything is possible. No, in fact, effectively, what misses is that Dart made the impact. We know we reduced the orbital period of Dimorphos by 33 minutes. High success. We moved it. Now, the question is, what was the efficiency, the real efficiency, and in which state is now Dimorphos? Because my numerical simulations, they need to reproduce the outcome. Is the outcome a crater? In this case, what is the size of the crater I need to reproduce and the depth? Or did we entirely reshape the asteroid, which is actually what we predict? Because from the DART impact, we have at least some data from the ground-based observations, also from a small Italian CubeSat called DishaCube that was deployed by DART 2 weeks before impact, and that give us images of a few minutes after impact. But again, unfortunately, he couldn't see the final outcome because the final outcome takes hours to stabilize. And then we have images from the Hubble telescope, the James Webb. So taking together all this data, the only way to explain these partial data, still partial, but the only way, is to assume that Dimorphos was very weak and that we entirely reshaped it. But this is just prediction based on partial data. So now we have to check with a detective. And in fact, what's super cool, I think, and I think this is the first time that happens, is that we have images of Dimorphos before impact. And now we are going again to the same body, but we already know the same body does not look like anymore it was before. Of course, because we impacted it. So we have the before, and we're going to see the after. And many possibilities are possible. Many possibilities are possible. Yeah, because maybe we reshaped it. We have images of the surface before impact. We know that the boulders we see on these images are not there anymore because they have been destroyed. So how is it going to look like? And then we have Didymos, the main body, which probably also have experienced impact of ejecta of Dimorphos, because some of them have been ejected by the solar radiation pressure at very long distance. In fact, the Hubble Space Telescope showed us that we have a tail extending at tens of thousands of kilometers from Dimorphos. We made a comet, basically. But some of these ejecta may have also been redistributed on Dimorphos and on Didymos. So basically, the whole thing has been totally changed. And now we are so much curious to know what's the outcome. What's this change? So that's what Hera will say, so that the numerical impact models have a fully documented impact experiment to test their validity, which needs the final outcome, but also the characterization of the target itself. Because even in my code, I need to know which target I start with. Do I start with a monolithic rock or with a rock made of many boulders with void inside? And this is where Hera will also, for the first time, measure the internal properties of an asteroid. This has never been done. So far, the only knowledge we have of the internal properties is indirect, is through the measurement of the bulk density, which we compare with the bulk density of solid rocks. And then the difference tells us how much void we must have. But we don't know whether these are large voids, a few large voids, or many little voids, for instance, because we never went into an asteroid. Of course, with Hera, we don't go into an asteroid, but with a CubeSat, which is supported by the Luxembourg Space Agency, we have a low-frequency radar, which will send radio wave into the asteroid, and the way they reflect will tell us the level of heterogeneity, etc. So we'll also have this new measurement, which has not been done so far, and which is very important because the response of an asteroid to an impact highly depends on the internal properties. So we also need to have this knowledge.
So you said with a CubeSat, but there will be two CubeSats.
There are two. In fact, this is the first mission. So the European Space Agency sent actually the first mission that includes a mother spacecraft, so a main spacecraft, and two CubeSats for deep space exploration of an asteroid. So when Hera arrives at the asteroid, it will first make a close proximity operations by itself to understand the system, to already send images. We have cameras on board. We have an hyperspectral imager that will give us data on the composition. We have a thermal infrared imager by the Japanese Space Agency. So we have an international partner that will measure the thermal properties, and a laser altimeter. And then we have two CubeSats that will be deployed a few weeks after arrival. One deployed 2 weeks before the other one. So the first one is called Juventas, supported by the Luxembourg Space Agency and GOM Space Industry, that will be deployed carrying a low-frequency radar and a gravimeter. And in fact, after investigating the internal properties, it will land on Dimorphos. That will be the first time we land a CubeSat on such a small 150-meter size asteroid. And after landing with a gravimeter, we measure how the gravity field of the asteroid changes while it turns around the main body. So we'll have enhanced gravity measurements. And the second CubeSat is called Milani, made by Taivac company in Italy. And it will carry a near-infrared imager to measure the mineralogy, and a dust detector and analyzer. And because there is an intersatellite link between the two CubeSat and the mother spacecraft, so the two CubeSat will communicate the data they get to the mother spacecraft that will then communicate them to the Earth, we will also use the intersatellite link to see how the CubeSat trajectory are perturbed by Dimorphos and Didymos. That will enhance our knowledge of the mass of Dimorphos.
Okay, but here you're talking all about looking at almost at Dimorphos, but you also said you want to check what happened with Didymos.
Of course.
So I'm missing a third CubeSat that would do that.
No. In fact, we are looking at both of them.
Okay.
We are going into more details on Dimorphos because we want to understand the dart impact that occurred on Dimorphos. But of course, we will also investigate Didymos. And actually, we are discussing the possibility to land Milani, the second CubeSat, which has no science goal for landing, but we have to deposit it somewhere. And we are discussing to deposit it on Didymos, so that we have one on Dimorphos and one on Didymos. And by miracle, if it still works when it is landed, then we'll have detailed image from the surface of Didymos. So no, of course, we have two rocks for the price of one. So we want to exploit at the maximum.
Yeah, of course, especially considering how far it is, you really need to.
Exactly. And that's also allow us to do some science as a bonus, although all the requirements of Hera are targeting planetary defense. We want to understand how the binary system form, because we have at least 15% of asteroids that are binaries. I will tell you why I say at least. And we want to understand their formation. So we have scenarios to explain how they form, but we need to verify them. And by measuring the properties of the two, we can, of course, advance in this knowledge. I say at least 15% because this was based on what we see from the ground. We detected binary asteroids from the ground, and removing the bias we have, we extrapolated and say we have 15%. But we may have more, because an example is there is a mission called Lucy at NASA, which is going to investigate what we call the Trojan asteroids. These are asteroids that share the same orbit as Jupiter at 60 degrees from the planet. These are called Lagrangian points. These are points of stability that Lagrange, an astronomer, discovered by equations again in the 18th century. And we want to understand the origin of this Trojan because these has consequences on the early stage of the solar system, to make it short. But on the way, because it's a very long mission, it was launched already a few years ago, and until 2033, they're going to do some flybys of Trojan asteroids very far away. And on the way, it performed flyby of main belt asteroids, so between Mars and Jupiter. And it already did 2 flybys, one very recently in April 2025, but another one last year. And last year, it went to an asteroid called Dinkinesh, supposedly single, and then the flyby showed 2 bodies. So it was a binary, and that was not detected on the ground. And even more crazy, the small moon is itself a contact binary made of 2 boulders together. So that's why I'm thinking maybe there are more binary than we think, and that's why it's very important to be able to understand them. And with Hera, we will hopefully improve our knowledge on the binary formation. In fact, this is interesting because how do you decide whether an asteroid mission is a planetary defense mission or a science mission or a mission devoted to asteroid resources? Because now we have also some countries, including Luxembourg, and companies interested in using them as resources. Well, it's not easy because whatever your main objective, the knowledge you get basically feeds the 3 domains, which is science, planetary defense, and resources, because you need in each case to understand their composition, their structure, and how they respond to an external action. So when you deflect an asteroid for planetary defense, the response to the impact of the asteroid is also very relevant scientifically and for resources. When you get a sample, the same. So that's why it's very difficult to put in boxes these missions, whether they are planetary defense. And for Hera, when we proposed this mission at the European Space Agency, that was a problem initially. Because the member states were saying, hey, but you propose this mission in the space safety program, but you talk about science. Yeah, of course I talk about science, because even though the requirements are focused on planetary defense, the same knowledge will feed my science knowledge. Should I hide it? No, it's a bonus. So now, little by little, they accepted this concept. But initially, people that like to put in boxes different missions. And in fact, when you talk about asteroid mission, the OSIRIS-REx mission understood that immediately, because OSIRIS-REx is an acronym. And one R is for resources and one S is for security. Despite the fact that this is really a science mission, because the main goal is to understand the role of asteroids in the emergence of life on Earth. So it's really science. And yet, in the acronym, they accepted to put security and resources because they understood that studying Bennu, which is a near-Earth asteroid. Near-Earth asteroid means planetary defense. And because it may be rich in water and other interesting minerals, then it's also resources.
It's a great point, and it's something that always fascinates me also on the decision-making process for lunar landing, because I always see this as kind of a rope-pulling exercise, because there are the scientists that say, well, for science, we need to land there, right? And there are, of course, all the other parties involved. So, but that's a different story. We're not talking today about the moon, because I think we should probably talk for another 2 hours if we were to, and we're really focusing on asteroids. And just one more question before we actually solve the pub quiz question too. I know you're here for the Planetary Defense Challenge, right, with the Asteroid Foundation. What do you see? What are the reactions of youngsters to these kind of ideas?
So the public and the young generation love this subject. In some countries it was considered as a source of worries, etc. They don't understand that, in fact, no, the public likes to know we are taking care of it. Plus, it has a link with fictional movies, adventures. We are saving the Earth, so they love it. That's why I think it's very important to talk about this topic, because it's a way to attract the young generation to science. You have to find some source of inspiration that bring back the young people to science knowledge. And this one is excellent for this. And I guess space exploration in general, but I don't know why planetary defense especially. People love that because it's concrete, because we have missions, we have images, there is a link with protecting our Earth. So all the subject that the young people are really liking. And there are many missions. So this Planetary Defense Challenge is great because we offer them a virtual scenario and they have to find a solution. And then there is a winner. So there is also a competition. And it's a way for them to realize the complexity of a space mission, like from just the idea to, in practice, how do we do that? So I think it's a great idea. So we have this supported by Asteroid Foundation that also organize Asteroid Day every year. And in 2029, we have another milestone, and I think this is very important to talk about it briefly, is that in 2029, we have an asteroid called Apophis, which is about 350 meters inside, that will come so close to the Earth at 1/10 of the distance between the Earth and the Moon, 32,000 kilometers, that its light will be visible with naked eye from Europe, including Luxembourg, if the sky is clear, Africa. And this is something that happens only every 1,000 years at minimum. An object this size coming so close to the Earth. So this is for us our only opportunity to see such an event, which is extraordinary because it comes so close that the tidal forces of the Earth, the gravity of the Earth, may modify the properties of the asteroid. So you see, I was telling you that all interactions with asteroids generated a response which is not the one we predicted, right? But so far, all these interactions were done by humans through sampling operations or an impact, right? This time, 2029, nature does the job for us. The gravity of the Earth may do the interaction, and we just have to be there to observe what happened. And this is why we have under development at the European Space Agency a mission called Ramses, which plans to make a rendezvous with Apophis, observe how the body may have its property changed by the tidal forces, and feed in live to the public the real images of the asteroids while the public looks in the sky to the light emitted by the asteroid. So it's fantastic. That will remain the collective memory, because I can imagine a child looking at the light in the sky and on a screen seeing what it really looks like. This has never happened. So it's now under development, waiting for final approval by the ESA Council at ministerial level in November 2025. And hopefully it will go. And this is so exciting that related to Asteroid Day, we proposed a resolution at the UN that was voted in December 2024 that makes of 2029 the International Year of Asteroid Awareness and Planetary Defense. So not only we will organize something on the 30th of June 2029 for Asteroid Day, but during the whole year, there will be events around the world. First, to introduce the encounter of Apophis and telling people there is no risk at all. We know where it comes. It's just a fantastic opportunity. And then the rest of the year, we will, of course, talk about these images of Apophis and how things have changed, etc. So it's really fantastic. And again, we are preparing the young generation to this event because we want them to be able to participate with us to this exciting adventure.
So great. You already talked about future. I don't have to ask anymore. We have already what to look for and what we know what is happening right now. Please check out what is going on with Hera and all the other missions you're involved in, because of course I also wanted to talk about MMX, but we will not have time this time. So next time, hopefully, exactly.
Yeah. There are many. It's great.
There are many. It's amazing for you, but amazing also for the public. I have a feeling that I keep missing certain landings even on the moon. I just like, oh, you tried? I didn't even know, because, you go back in time with Apollo missions, everybody knew. But now because of the industry being involved as well, there's just so much going on and so much to check.
We are victim of too many successes, which is great. And we have tens of asteroid images coming until 2035 to generate new excitement.
Yeah, exactly. The images as well, right? I mean, you mentioned the James Webb Telescope. I mean, it's just, even that part is totally amazing. Sorry, listeners, for getting so excited, but you can clearly see that I am about this subject. And what remains is to solve the pop quiz question. So if you remember, we had some rock musician and the question about that. So who did you mean and what is it about?
This is related to asteroid images, actually. So there is a rock legend, of course, that we all know, who contributes to our efforts, who supported actually the implementation of Hera. And the next mission is Sir Dr. Brian May, who is a guitarist of the famous group Queen. He's an astrophysicist and he's an expert of stereoscopy. So basically what Brian does is to put together two images taken at different angles and convert them in three-dimensional images. And this is not easy, because this is what our eyes do. So you would say, okay, the eyes do it. So no, but here the problem is, when we talk about asteroids, right? You never have two images at slightly different angles taken simultaneously, except if you have two cameras watching at the same time. And therefore the shadows change from one image to the other. So we have to realign everything. And he's an artist and an expert of that. He's fascinating. And really, I mean, we have a joke together, because each time I say I fall from my chair when I receive your images, because effectively when you see the images in 2D, and you take his glasses, he made glasses called old glasses to watch in 3D, the 2D images. It's a totally different world. Seeing in 3D, we don't realize that because it seems natural, but it's amazing. You learn so much compared to the 2D, plus the beauty. And he helped us to choose the sampling sites, like in OSIRIS-REx, because we had so many boulders. We needed to really evaluate the age of the boulders to make sure that the spacecraft can land safely. And Brian converted all these 2D images of the sampling site in 3D images, and that helped a lot to evaluate the age of the boulders. So it's not only beautiful and exciting and chair-folding, as I say, it's also very useful scientifically. And he really is really into it and is very helpful. And I can also say that when we discuss what we see on the images, I can really have a serious science discussion with him, because he's a real scientist. So, you can be a rock star and be fascinated by rocks and help us solve many problems. So it's really great to have him on board.
And it's great you mentioned it, because, 3D imaging in general, the whole field of computer vision as such, and the ability to analyze images and what we can do also for autonomous vehicles in general is very, very important. We have to push the boundaries there too. So
absolutely. And he was with us in Darmstadt in the operation room when we made the flyby of Mars with Hera, because in order to gain energy freely, we use planets, the gravity of planets. So the operation team of ESA decided to make a flyby of Mars to accelerate Hera. And we asked them, and they agreed with us, and they had to modify a little the trajectory to be able to see Deimos, the second moon of Mars, while we are doing the flyby. And in particular, the side which is opposite to Mars, which have never been seen except by the Emirate mission called HOPE, but they never published yet the data. So we are super excited, and Brian decided to come at the operations center of ESOC in Darmstadt, and immediately, once we got the image, he started to make stereo pairs, and it was so fun to be there together and trying to do the steroid. He's really into it, and in a few hours he was able to provide us some new stereo pairs, which really allow us to see some features we never saw before. So there is a mixture which I love of art and science working together, because again, it's multidisciplinary, but when we say multidisciplinary, it doesn't have to be only science. It can be science, art, and even sometimes philosophy.
Or music, if we talk about, all the amazing things that are done with sound and data, right?
Absolutely. And even music is important, even for me, because often I work with music because that give me inspiration and help me to think.
Absolutely.
So everything is connected.
Okay, so we talked about so many things, and I hope to share as many things as possible in the show notes. So if you want to see, unfortunately, you can't see Patrick, but he's, very expressive. There was a lot of things that you were trying to explain. So I'll try to also share links so you can see for yourself. And what remains is to thank you very much for today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
And this is it for today. Don't forget to subscribe, to follow us. Remember, you can also suggest guests and support us on Patreon. And today, for a change, we're recording at the Loft Studios. I would really like to thank for having us here. This was Silex, and my name is Hanna Siemaszko.